Before a single wrestling empire dominated TV screens across the globe, the sport was a fractured, fiercely territorial business. Think of it as a patchwork of independent kingdoms, each ruled by a powerful promoter, each with its own heroes and villains, and each with a fan base that was damn sure their local promotion was the center of the wrestling universe. And nowhere was this more true than in Canada. For decades, the second largest country in the world was carved into several distinct wrestling fiefdoms. From the rugged West, through the industrial heartland of Ontario, and into the vibrant, bilingual culture of Quebec, these territories weren't just businesses, they were cultural institutions. They were the breeding grounds for some of the most legendary figures the sport has ever known. This is the story of how Canada's wrestling kingdom was built, how it created a golden age of heroes, and how, in just a few short years, it was completely destroyed. To understand how Canada became a wrestling powerhouse, you first have to understand the strange and powerful organization that governed the entire North American scene, the National Wrestling Alliance, or NWA. Formed in 1948, the NWA wasn't a single company. It was more like a syndicate of regional promoters who all agreed to a system that would make them all rich. At its core, the NWA ran on a simple but brilliant principle: stay in your own backyard. The promoters literally divided a map of the United States and Canada into their own personal kingdoms. A promoter in Florida wouldn't dare run a show in Georgia, and the promoter in California wouldn't dream of stepping on the toes of the guy in Oregon. This gentleman's agreement was the golden rule, prohibiting promoters from invading another's territory. This structure created a carefully balanced and incredibly profitable business model that worked for over 30 years. The glue holding this empire together was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. This wasn't just a title, it was the attraction. The champion would travel from territory to territory, defending the title against each region's biggest star. It was a genius move. It made the local hero look like a world beater, gave fans a taste of the wider wrestling world, and made the NWA World title the most important prize in the sport. When the champ came to town, business boomed. In Canada, this system flourished. The nation was carved up into several territories, with the four major players based in Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, and Montreal, and another vital office, Grand Prix Wrestling, ruling the Maritimes. While some regional promotions existed earlier, the foundation for this national structure was truly laid with the founding of Maple Leaf Wrestling in 1930, which would become the crown jewel of the nation's wrestling empire. In the heart of Ontario, the Toronto territory, known to everyone as Maple Leaf Wrestling, was the undisputed king of Canadian wrestling. Its history began in 1930, but its dominance was cemented in 1931 when promoter Jack Corcoran secured the wrestling rights to the brand new Maple Leaf Gardens. It was under the Tunney family, however, that Toronto truly became a wrestling capital. After taking the reins in the late 1930s, Frank Tunney steered the promotion for over 4 decades, officially joining the NWA in 1949 and establishing Toronto as its flagship Canadian territory. The Tunney promotion was built on 2 pillars: the iconic Maple Leaf Gardens and an unbelievably loyal fan base. The Gardens was a cathedral of sport, and for generations of Torontonians, going to the wrestling matches was a ritual. This created a remarkable loyalty. Fans were often reluctant to even try a competing product. They were Tunney fans, and the Gardens was their house. Frank Tunney was a master politician. He served as the NWA's president in the 1960s, and, in a move that shows you just how much pull he had, also held a vice presidency in Vince McMahon Sr.'s rival WWF. This unique spot allowed Tunney to bring in stars from everywhere. It wasn't weird for a Maple Leaf Wrestling card to feature 2 different world title matches from competing organizations on the same night. In March 1979, he famously promoted a card where WWF champion Bob Backlund faced AWA champion Nick Bockwinkel, with a young Ric Flair defending the NWA title on the undercard. The territory's local hero for decades was the beloved Whipper Billy Watson, a two-time world champion who was a household name. But Tunney also knew how to create villains. From 1969 on, the vile and terrifying The Sheik headlined shows for over 8 years, drawing huge crowds who were desperate to see him finally get beaten. Later, a partnership with Jim Crockett's Mid-Atlantic Territory brought in stars like Ric Flair, who became one of the most popular wrestlers the city had ever seen. During the eras of The Sheik and later Dino Bravo, cards at Maple Leaf Gardens would routinely draw crowds of 17,000 to 18,000 fans. This wasn't just a promotion, it was the center of Toronto's sports culture. While the Tunneys ruled the East with political skill, another empire was being forged out west, built on grit, toughness, and the unforgiving vision of one man. This was Stampede Wrestling, the Calgary-based kingdom founded in 1948 by the legendary Stu Hart. For nearly 50 years, Stampede was the dominant force in Western Canada, a promotion that was woven into the cultural fabric of Alberta. The heart of this kingdom was a place that became a myth in wrestling lore, the Hart family dungeon. Located in the basement of the Hart mansion, the dungeon was Stu's personal training school, and it was infamous. It was a place of grueling, painful, and relentless training where only the toughest survived. Stu's philosophy, passed on with head trainer Mr. Hito, was simple. Wrestling should be real, it should be hard, and it should be respected. They instilled this philosophy into generations of wrestlers who passed through those doors. The dungeon became a legendary production line for superstars. Stampede Wrestling's TV program, hosted for most of its run by the iconic Ed Whalen, was a staple in Calgary and was eventually syndicated to dozens of countries around the world. The style was raw and physical. This wasn't about showmanship. It was about believable, athletic contests. At first, it struggled to get big names, but by the 60s, stars like Harley Race and Stan Stasiak were passing through. Later, legends like Abdullah the Butcher, Andre the Giant, and the Junkyard Dog all did tours in Stampede. But the promotion's greatest legacy is the talent it created. The list of dungeon graduates is a who's who of wrestling history. Jake the Snake Roberts, superstar Billy Graham, the British Bulldogs, Brian Pillman, Chris Jericho, Edge, and of course, Stu's own sons, Bret the Hitman Hart and Owen Hart. These wrestlers were molded by Stu's demanding training, emerging as some of the most technically gifted performers in the world. Stampede wasn't just a wrestling promotion, it was an academy of pain and passion that produced wrestling royalty. Further east, Quebec was a different beast entirely. Montreal had been a wrestling hotbed since the 1930s, but what made it unique was its bilingual culture. To make it in Montreal, you had to connect with both English and French-speaking fans. Announcers, commentators, and especially the wrestlers themselves needed to be fluent in both languages to tell their stories. This tradition was so strong that even when the WWF later came to town, they kept it going with French-language segments hosted by Quebec native Pat Patterson. Unlike Toronto or Calgary, Montreal was often a battleground for competing promotions. After a quiet period in the mid-70s, the final golden age of Montreal wrestling kicked off in 1980. That's when three influential figures, promoter Frank Valois, legendary booker Gino Brito, and the most recognizable wrestler on the planet, Andre the Giant, joined forces to create Promotions Verusac. The company would soon be renamed Lutte Internationale, or International Wrestling. Lutte Internationale quickly became Quebec's top promotion. It brought wrestling back to the famous Montreal Forum and, at its peak, drew crowds of over 10,000 fans. Its roster was a mix of returning Quebecois stars and international talent, with the promotion's top good guy being the powerful Dino Bravo. A match between Bravo and King Tonga at the Forum in December 1984
drew an incredible 19,500 fans. Lutte Internationale was the launching pad for a wave of French-Canadian talent who would make a huge splash in the US, including Bravo, Rick Martel, and the Rougeau brothers. When Lutte Internationale finally closed its doors in 1987, it was widely seen as the end of a 50-year golden age of wrestling in Quebec. It was the fall of Canada's final, distinct wrestling kingdom.
For decades, the gentleman's agreement had kept the peace, but in the early 1980s, a new prince ascended to a northern throne, and he had no respect for the old ways. In 1982, Vincent Kennedy McMahon purchased the World Wrestling Federation from his father. Where his father saw a successful regional business, Vince Jr. saw a launching pad for global domination. He had no loyalty to the other promoters and no respect for their imaginary lines on a map. His goal was to shatter the kingdom system and build a single, all-powerful empire. McMahon's weapon of choice? A new technology the older promoters had failed to grasp: cable television. In 1983, he struck a deal with the USA Network, putting WWF programming on the national stage. Suddenly, the WWF wasn't just a Northeastern territory anymore. It was being broadcast into living rooms in Florida, Texas, California, and, crucially, all across Canada. The very idea of territorial borders was becoming obsolete. This was a declaration of war. The old-school promoters were furious. McMahon wasn't just breaking the rules, he was burning the rule book. He started signing top talent from other territories to exclusive, big-money contracts, something that was unheard of. Stars like Hulk Hogan from the AWA and Roddy Piper from the Mid-Atlantic region were the main attractions for their home promotions. By poaching them, McMahon wasn't just stealing wrestlers, he was ripping the heart out of his competition. In Canada, the invasion was swift and decisive. By the mid-1980s, Vince McMahon and his parent company, Titan Sports, began taking over. Through a series of buyouts, partnerships, and strategic power plays, he absorbed the Toronto and Montreal territories. Other promotions, like Vancouver's NWA All-Star Wrestling, weren't bought out directly, but found themselves unable to compete against the WWF's national expansion and eventually folded. The kings were being overthrown, and the Canadian wrestling kingdoms were the first to fall. The speed of the collapse was stunning. McMahon's strategy was a brutal, multi-pronged assault. First, the takeovers. In 1984, after the death of Frank Tunney, his nephew Jack aligned the legendary Toronto promotion exclusively with the WWF, essentially handing Vince the keys to Canada's most important kingdom. That same year, McMahon bought Stampede Wrestling from Stu Hart, and though he sold it back to the Hart family the following year, the writing was on the wall. No territory was safe. Montreal's Lutte Internationale battled on until 1987 before it, too, was finally put out of business by the WWF's unstoppable expansion. The talent drain was a fatal blow. The regional promotions had always operated by building local stars fans would pay to see every single week. When the WWF came calling with national exposure and far bigger paychecks, that model collapsed. The constant poaching left the territories in a financial death spiral. Without their main eventers, ticket sales plummeted. Without ticket sales, they couldn't afford to compete. By 1988, the war was over. Nearly every territory across North America was either bankrupt or had been swallowed by McMahon or his main rival, Jim Crockett Promotions. In Canada, the change was dramatic. The name Maple Leaf Wrestling was kept, but it was now just the title for the WWF's Canadian TV show, a hollow shell of what it once was. The unique flavors of each territory were gone, blended into a single national product. The weekly ritual of seeing local heroes at the Montreal Forum or the Stampede Corral disappeared. The very idea of a wrestler being a god in one town, a hero who belonged to the community, simply vanished.
The gentleman's agreement was dead. The NWA was finished as a major force, and one man's ambition had shattered an entire empire.
So what was left when the dust settled? The collapse of the territory system was more than a business shift. It was the end of an era. An entire ecosystem that had defined pro wrestling for 50 years was wiped out. Countless regional stars, men who were huge main eventers in their home territories, were suddenly left with nowhere to go. Many couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the WWF's more cartoonish style, and they just faded away, their legacies living on only in the memories of the local fans who once hailed them as heroes. In Canada, the loss was profound. With the closure of Lutte Internationale, aspiring French-Canadian wrestlers had no local stage, forcing them to either Americanize their style for the WWF or give up. The gritty realism of Stampede was replaced by the glitz of Hulkamania. The loyal crowds of Maple Leaf Gardens were now cheering for superstars from New York. But not everything was lost. While the kingdoms themselves were destroyed, they left behind one incredible legality: the talent they created. The Canadian territories were the ultimate training ground. Before they became global superstars, almost every huge Canadian name of the 80s and 90s got their start in this system. Legends like Bret, the Hitman, Hart, Rowdy Roddy Piper, Chris Jericho, and Edge all emerged from the ashes of the territories to achieve worldwide fame. They were the products of a bygone era, the last generation of royalty from a fallen kingdom. The territories may be gone, but their legacy is etched into the history of wrestling through the champions they built. The story of Canada's wrestling territories is a classic tale of empire. It's about powerful kings building their domains, a golden age of local heroes, and a swift, brutal invasion that changed everything. The rich, diverse landscape of regional wrestling was sacrificed for a single global product. For fans who remember it, it was the loss of a special connection to promotions that felt like they were truly their own. The kingdoms are gone, and the kings have passed into legend, but the echoes of that era can still be heard in the DNA of modern wrestling. What are your memories of these legendary Canadian promotions? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look back at wrestling history, make sure to like this video, share it with another fan, and subscribe for more stories from the Squared Circle. Thanks for watching.